3 weeks ago, the mayors and vice mayors of 8 San Francisco Bay Area cities gathered, online thanks to the pandemic, to commemorate Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights. Mayor-elect Bob Verner from Livermore, California, spoke about how happy he was to be included in the event and expressed his appreciation for the Indian community. He also presented a Diwali proclamation on behalf of the city of Livermore. The event was a beautiful example of America at its finest, with people from various backgrounds and religions joining together in a celebration of each other's cultures, paying tribute to the wonderful diversity of cultures our country is home to, and generally embracing pluralism. But there was one catch. The Diwali proclamation presented by Mayor-elect Verner was not presented to the Indian community, but rather to the Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, HSS. In fact, the Diwali celebration itself was organized not by the Indian community, but rather by the HSS, a polarizing organization whose membership represents only a sliver of the Indian American community. And the event's speakers included not just various elected officials and celebratory community members, but the president of the North American branch of the HSS, a global organization which is the international wing of India's fascist paramilitary, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS. Calling the RSS fascist is not mere hyperbole. Aside from the organization's ideology and practices, its founding and initial expansion historically paralleled the rise and fall of fascism in Europe. Its earliest leaders and their mentors not only offered praise for the racial policies of Nazi Germany, but actually met Benito Mussolini in fascist Italy and subsequently compared the RSS to his fascist youth groups. Its earliest ideologues, who articulated its underlying principle of Hindutva, which Amnesty International defines as the political ideology of an exclusively Hindu nation, compared Indian Muslims to German Jews. Simultaneously, its founders were claiming that the Muslims are making themselves a nuisance, insisting that we shall have to fight them, and suggesting that for that purpose, the RSS may be useful and handy. Moreover, in 2011, white supremacist terrorist Anders Breivik of Norway praised the RSS for how they dominate the streets and often riot and attack Muslims. He was so fascinated by the paramilitary that he called it essential for Western supremacist movements and the RSS to learn from each other and cooperate as much as possible. 2 years later, the founder of Arctos Media, the largest alt-right publishing house in the world, was in India meeting with the RSS's national spokesperson and pledging to become the Indian rights gateway to the Western world. Founded in 1925, 2 months after Adolf Hitler published Mein Kampf, and 5 months after he founded the Schutzstaffel SS, the RSS today hosts up to 600,000 members in daily drills and boasts an estimated 6 million total members. It is uniformed, armed, and all male. It has dozens of special purpose subsidiaries: religious, political, educational, legal, professional, social, and so on. And, as mentioned, international. Collectively, these groups are known as the Sangh Parivar, or family of organizations. The most important of these are the RSS itself, its religious wing called the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, VHP, and its political wing called the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP. The HSS, the international wing of the RSS, was founded in 1947 when an RSS member emigrated from India. While traveling, he spotted a fellow member wearing the uniform of the paramilitary. Gathering other interested emigrants, they held the first meeting of the RSS abroad, subsequently formalizing the group as the HSS. Today, the HSS has a strong presence in Canada, the UK, various countries in continental Europe, some African countries, a number of Asian countries, New Zealand and Australia, and of course in the US. There are an estimated 200 or more chapters of the HSS in the US alone, with one of the oldest and strongest being found in Houston, Texas. Houston's first HSS chapter was established sometime in the 1970s or early 1980s by Ramesh Butata, who is today the HSS USA's vice president. HSS membership, and especially its leadership, appears to mostly consist of people who were either members of the RSS before they left India, or whose family has been involved in the paramilitary. It's the latter case with Butata. His father was active in the RSS, and in the 1970s was even imprisoned in India for his RSS links. Ramesh had already emigrated to the US, but his father's arrest inspired him to get closer to the RSS for the first time in his life, and eventually to found an HSS chapter. In the words of his relative and fellow activist, there has been a steady stream of RSS workers coming through Butata's home over the decades, which even includes current RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat. Our soul is connected with the RSS, said one top HSS executive in 2016. We take inspiration from it. The RSS is our role model. We seek its guidance on crucial issues. Such guidance may occur during the quinquennial Global Summit of HSS in India, at which HSS members wear the RSS uniform and hear from RSS leadership. In 2010, Butata found himself at one of these conclaves, along with a sizable delegation from Houston, wearing the khaki shorts, white shirt, and black cap of the RSS, while posing with the now deceased founder of the HSS. RSS guidance of the HSS may possibly also occur when RSS executives tour HSS chapters abroad. The chief of the RSS, as mentioned, has visited Butata in Houston. So has Suresh Joshi, who is today the RSS's second in command. In 2012, for instance, Joshi spent 3 weeks touring half a dozen major US cities for the purpose of giving renewed motivation and clarity about RSS's philosophy to HSS chapters. Among those who hosted him were Butata, as well as Ved Nanda, the HSS North American president, who spoke at the Diwali celebration in California. HSS's highest profile and most publicly acknowledged activities are always such events. Celebrations of Diwali, Yoga Days, or Raksha Bandhan, a traditional Hindu festival where a sister ties a talisman around the wrist of her brother to signify the brother's responsibility to protect his sister. Invariably accompanied by a camera to document the occasion, and subsequently publicize it through their organization's official social media outlets, the HSS members participating in these Raksha Bandhan ceremonies almost always wear HSS branded shirts and often unfurl an HSS banner while visiting fire departments, police and sheriff's departments, and city mayor and county supervisor offices, as well as congressional offices. Congressman Bill Foster of Illinois is one of the most frequent participants. Pictures of their visit to his office in August 2019 are now prominently featured on the HSS's website. The relationship goes both ways. They have come to him, but he has also gone to them. As far back as January of 2013, Foster was the chief guest at a Chicagoland HSS event celebrating Swami Vivekananda. Notably, 7 months later, controversy clouded another Vivekananda event co-hosted by the HSS, after the Council for a Parliament of the World's Religions, an organization directly inspired by the Swami, publicly withdrew its co-sponsorship of the event due to the controversial political positions of the other co-sponsors. Nonetheless, Foster's public association with the American Sangh Parivar groups has continued unabated. In January 2017, he took the floor of the House of Representatives to recognize the HSS, declaring, "Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh is a voluntary, non-profit, social, and cultural organization." The phrasing directly mirrored the rhetoric of RSS apologists. The RSS is not a fascist paramilitary, but rather the world's largest volunteer social and cultural organization. Of course, it is possible for it to be both. Sangh Parivar groups, both in India as well as abroad, unquestionably engage in a wide range of social and even outright charitable activities. In August, Indian media reported that the RSS, as part of its COVID relief efforts, had provided nearly 50 million food packets and millions of masks, as well as set up hundreds of centers for distributing medicine. That same month, the New Jersey State Assembly passed a resolution recognizing HSS's relief efforts, which included distribution of over 11,000 pounds of food and nearly 75,000 masks. Some of the RSS's largest charitable organizations are directly linked to the HSS in America. Seva International, for instance, which specializes in disaster relief and rehabilitation efforts, mostly in India, is based in Houston and was co-founded by the HSS's Ramesh Buttada. Ekal Vidyalaya, a project to set up private, free, single-teacher schools throughout India, was founded by Ramesh Shah, also an HSS member living in Houston. Both Ekal and Seva, however, appear focused on assisting Hindu victims only, to the disadvantage of non-Hindus impacted by the same disasters, as well as brainwashing underprivileged children in RSS ideology. In 2018, for instance, after catastrophic flooding in India's southern state of Kerala, Rajiv Malhotra, a major American apologist for Hindutva, issued a call for donations to Seva, claiming that the monies would be used to help Kerala Hindus. Arguing that Christians and Muslims worldwide are raising lots of money to help mainly their own people and agendas, he implied that Seva should therefore do the same. Meanwhile, a teacher for Ekal admitted in 2004 that teachers are selected only if they subscribe to the RSS way of thought. A spokesperson for the VHP, which is closely associated with the program, commented that they do not mind if even Muslim or Christian students attend Ekal schools on the condition that they accept that they are by birth Hindus. As recently reported in India's Caravan magazine, the VHP's website states that the launch of the Ekal Vidyalaya Foundation of USA in 2002 was among some of the major contributions made by VHP of America. Yet another US-based charitable group floated by the American Sangh Parivar is the India Development and Relief Fund, IDRF. In 2002, while the HSS's Ramesh Buttada served as a major donor and advisor to the group, and his relative Vijay Pallod served as its vice president, the IDRF was swept up in controversy when a report documented how the millions of dollars, including matching corporate funds, raised by the nonprofit had been used to fund organizations in at least 3 states in India that are directly involved in large-scale violence against Muslim and Christian minorities. Such violence, the report suggested, may have also included the 2002 Gujarat Pogrom. In 2002, approximately 2,000 Muslims were massacred in the Indian state of Gujarat. Reporting on the violence, Human Rights Watch, HRW, stated that the groups most directly responsible for violence against Muslims in Gujarat included the RSS, the VHP, and the ruling BJP, noting that these groups have all promoted the argument that because Hindus constitute the majority of Indians, India should be a Hindu state. Narendra Modi himself, an RSS member who was then the Chief Minister of Gujarat and is now the Prime Minister of India, was directly and repeatedly implicated, including by top participants in the violence, as signing off on the carnage. As a result, Modi was banned from entering the US from 2005 until his election as Prime Minister in 2014. HRW's report on the pogrom was entitled, "We Have No Orders to Save You," which is what several witnesses reported the police told them when they appealed for rescue from their attackers. Graffiti discovered on torched Muslim institutions declared, "The police are with us." After the violence ended, many testified that police refused to file charges on behalf of the victims or record the names of the accused. Writing in 2002, renowned Indian author Arundhati Roy explained that in the years before the pogrom, the police, the administration, and the political cadres at every level in Gujarat were systematically penetrated. As Roy states, the RSS runs a shadow government that functions through tens of thousands of shakas, branches, and other ideologically affiliated organizations with different names, some of them astonishingly violent, spread across the country. The RSS today has white supremacists and racists from the United States and Europe circling around it. 17 years later, in 2019, Roy modified her perspective. No longer a shadow state or a parallel state, it is the state, she wrote about the RSS. Day by day, we see examples of its control over the media, the police, the intelligence agencies. Worryingly, it appears to exercise considerable influence over the armed forces, too. Indeed, the RSS is a social and cultural organization, but particularly operating through its dozens of special purpose subsidiaries, it has worked tirelessly over its 95 years of existence to become first a shadow state, and today simply the state. Such a goal synchronizes with the raison d'etre for the École program. As Caravan magazine reported, the schools are merely the starting point of the song's aim of influencing every other major aspect of the entire village's life: education, health, economy, environment, self-empowerment, culture, sense of morality, and the religion they follow. And also politics, something we see as an emerging trend in the US. In October 2019, Congressman Raja Krishnamurti of Illinois was the guest of honor at an HSS event organized specifically to celebrate the founding of the RSS. It was the fourth song event he had spoken at since taking office. As he spoke, he stood before not only an HSS banner, but also framed pictures of the RSS's two first chiefs, KB Hedgavar and MS Galvarkar. Hedgavar, who served as the RSS's first chief from 1925 to 1940, said its goal was to create a Hindustan of Hindus, which he compared to a Germany of Germans. While Mussolini was implementing his totalitarian philosophy of everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state, Hedgavar was advancing a not dissimilar concept. Claiming that the Hindu society faced daily onslaughts by outsiders, he insisted that the only solution was to organize the entire Hindu society within the RSS. The true path to national salvation, he argued, was none other than organization. Everything within the RSS, nothing outside the RSS, nothing against the RSS. Golvarkar, who served as the RSS's second and most influential chief from 1940 to 1973, published his manifesto a year before he assumed control of the paramilitary. It was 1939, just 1 year after Kristallnacht, the first Nazi pogrom against the Jews, and the same year that the Nazis annexed Austria and invaded Poland, sparking off the Second World War. Meanwhile, Golvarkar declared that Indian Christians and Muslims were internal threats. Calling them foreign races, he claimed that they must either be fused into the Hindu way of life or else be stripped of citizenship rights. Looking to Germany, he praised the Nazis for manifesting race pride at its highest in their efforts to keep up the purity of the race and its culture by purging the country of the Semitic races, the Jews. He concluded that the Nazis had set a good example by showing how it was supposedly impossible for different races and cultures to be assimilated into one united whole, and it was thus a good lesson for us in Hindustan to learn and profit by. Golvarkar further extolled Mussolini's Italy for awakening the old Roman race consciousness of conquering the whole territory round the Mediterranean Sea. And he celebrated how the ancient race spirit, which prompted the Germanic tribes to overrun the whole of Europe, has re-risen in modern Germany. He declared, "Even so with us. Our race spirit has once again roused itself. The race spirit has been awakening. The world has to see the might of the regenerated Hindu nation strike down the enemy's hosts with its mighty arm. Race spirit calls, national consciousness blazes forth, and we Hindus set our teeth in grim determination to wipe out the opposing forces." Since its inception, Golvarkar's transparent call to violence against non-Hindus has been translated by the RSS into intimidation, mob beatings, lynchings, targeted assassinations, terrorist bombings, and pogroms against religious minorities, mostly Christians and Muslims, but especially Muslims. The modern RSS, much more conscious of its public image, has steered away from transparently vicious rhetoric, although RSS chief Bhagwat routinely declares India to be a Hindu Rashtra, nation. However, its religious wing, the VHP, has been far more overtly vitriolic, as well as willing to take public ownership of its role in anti-minority violence. In October 2002, VHP chief Ashok Singhal termed the slaughter in Gujarat as a successful experiment which will be repeated all over the country. 2 months later, Praveen Togadia, who later replaced Singhal as the VHP's chief, declared that although they were once known as the lunatic fringe, now that Gujarat has become the graveyard of secular ideology, it had opened the door for them to make a laboratory of Hindutva out of the whole country. After assuming leadership of the VHP, Togadia, who got his start as an RSS activist, working so intimately with Narendra Modi that the two reportedly used to travel on a motorcycle or scooter across Gujarat spreading the song's ideology, publicly embraced the group's sponsorship of multiple massacres. Speaking at a rally in January 2013, the same month that Congressman Bill Foster was attending an HSS event in Illinois, Togadia declared, "I will show our history. One time when police withdrew in Assam, that place was Nellie, brothers, Hindus made a mountain of dead bodies. We counted more than 3,000 dead bodies, and not one dead body belonged to a Hindu. Oh, Hindu brothers, we did a similar massacre 20 years ago in Bhagalpur, Bihar. The river Ganga flows through Bhagalpur. That river was filled with dead bodies. They couldn't even count the dead bodies. They flowed into the ocean. Not a single dead body belonged to a Hindu. We did a similar massacre in Meerut and Moradabad. In Gujarat, we even massacred them in presence of police. The following year, the VHP organized its first so-called World Hindu Congress, WHC, in New Delhi. Keynote speakers included RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat, as well as the VHP's Ashok Singhal, who, referring to Modi's election, declared, "Proud Hindus have finally come to rule Delhi. It's time to create a Hindu superpower in the world." American panelists who joined the event included HSS North America's Ved Nanda, VHP America's President Abhaya Asthana, U.S. India Political Action Committee founder Sanjay Puri, and longtime VHP America organizer and now Michigan State Representative Padma Kupa. 4 years later, the VHP organized its second WHC, this time in Chicago. Once again, RSS's Bhagwat was the keynote speaker. This time, however, the event was mired in controversy. A few hours after Bhagwat's speech, a group of young South Asian American protesters who had infiltrated the event disrupted it, chanting, "RSS, turn around. We don't want you in our town." They were immediately rushed by a mob of audience members. "They choked, kicked, and spat on us," reported the protesters, most of whom were young women. For the next 2 days, hundreds of Indian Americans from a wide range of religious and non-religious backgrounds rallied outside the conference in protest. Their passion and motivation was bolstered in part by the fact that a few months previously, the CIA's newly published World Factbook had labeled the VHP, as well as its youth wing, the Bajrang Dal, as a religious militant organization. A host of Indian American elected officials of Hindu faith were invited to attend and speak at the WHC, but almost all declined or later withdrew. Ram Vilivalam, then a candidate but now an Illinois state senator, announced that he could not participate or stand by silently because of the nationalist individuals and organizations affiliated with the event. Ameya Pawar, then a Chicago city alderman, stated, "I'm a proud Hindu and the first Indian American elected to Chicago City Council. I'm extremely disappointed and ashamed the WHC would invite speakers and organizations that promote discrimination, Islamophobia, and Hindu nationalism. This is not who we are. I'm disgusted that peaceful protesters at the WHC were pushed, kicked, and spat on. The behavior of some attendees confirms that Hindu nationalists and the bigoted RSS have no place in a discussion about Hinduism." Even Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, despite her lengthy track record of association with RSS-linked groups, backed out. Although she was originally slated to chair the event, she publicly withdrew just days before, calling it a partisan Indian political event. Among the handful of politicians who resisted calls to boycott the event were then Ohio State Representative, now State Senator, Neeraj Antani, and Congressman Krishnamurti. Perhaps Krishnamurti's refusal to bow to pressure to drop out was motivated by the fact that one of his original and most generous campaign donors, Bharat Barai, was both an organizer and speaker at the event. Bharat Barai is a former governing councilor of VHP America, who currently serves as an advisor to the VHPA's Chicago chapter and is best described as Modi's strongest champion in America. In the 1990s, while Modi was still an internationally unknown RSS activist who had been assigned to work within the BJP, he twice toured America, staying in Barai's home on both occasions. After he was banned from entering the country in 2005, Modi was repeatedly hosted for video conferences organized by Barai to familiarize and popularize him with the diaspora. At times, in-person audiences in Chicago swelled to 1,000 or more, while the events were sometimes telecast to as many as 20 other U.S. cities. Days before Krishnamurti won the March 2016 primary, Barai, along with activists from the Overseas Friends of the BJP, OFBJP, the international wing of the BJP, rallied behind Krishnamurti at an event that Diaspora Media Report was held with a shared mission to collectively propel him into office. His path to victory was paved by thousands of dollars in donations from executives in VHPA Chicago, as well as, since 2015, a total of nearly $32,000 in donations from Bharat Barai and his wife. His campaign coffers have continued to be heavily lined by generous donations from activists and leaders of the OFBJP, VHPA, and HSS. In particular, a total of $39,000 from HSS Vice President Ramesh Buttada and his immediate family. Aside from his actions of traveling to India twice in his first term to meet Modi and discuss the special relationship and shared values between the US and BJP-ruled India, hosting an HSS delegation in his DC congressional office immediately upon returning from the first trip, and speaking at a minimum of 4 RSS-linked events since his election, Krishnamurti's inaction also speaks volumes. This past year, concerned by Krishnamurti's association with the RSS and appealing to his avowed proximity to the BJP government, Raju Rajagopal of Hindus for Human Rights repeatedly interacted with the congressman to both ask him to clarify his position on the RSS, as well as, most recently, request him to intervene with the Delhi government on behalf of Amnesty International India after the human rights group's bank accounts were frozen and it was forced to shutter its operations. Unfortunately, all of my efforts have been in vain, as the congressman has made no effort whatsoever to express any concern about the dire situation in India, especially for the religious minorities, wrote Rajagopal. His studied silence clearly casts a huge shadow over his claim as a champion of democratic values. 4 years before Krishnamurti entered the scene, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii was entering office, after massive support from the American song Bharavar. An American member of the Hare Krishna movement, who claims to have been working with the RSS since 2001, and was directly commissioned by the paramilitary to write a book detailing their side of the story about an anti-Christian pogrom in the Indian state of Odisha, introduced Gabbard to Vijay Pallod, the relative of HSS Vice President Ramesh Buttada, as she was seeking a congressional nomination in the August 2012 primary. In October 2011, nearly a year before she won the nomination, Pallod first donated to her campaign from Texas. He was followed soon after by Buttada and members of Buttada's family, and thereafter, the financial floodgates opened wide. Less than a week after winning the nomination, Gabbard was in California to speak at a VHPA-organized event featuring VHP's Ashok Singhal, the man who had described the 2002 Gujarat Pogrom as a successful experiment which will be repeated all over the country. Soon after, she was crisscrossing the country, for fundraisers organized by OFBJP and HSS executives in Florida, Texas, and elsewhere. In 2013, just 6 months into her first term in office, Gabbard hosted the RSS spokesperson, the OFBJP chief, and the president of the BJP, who was meeting with U.S. elected officials to lobby for a reversal of Modi's visa ban, in her D.C. office. Throughout the year, she spoke at 3 HSS and 2 VHPA events. Nearly 21% of her total campaign donations that year came from individuals distinctly identifiable as linked to the American song or to pro-Modi activism. By the end of the year, she swung into the action that proved to matter most to her RSS-linked backers. In December 2013, as Modi campaigned for India's prime ministership, a resolution was introduced in the US Congress which expressed concern about how strands of the Hindu nationalist movement have advanced a divisive and violent agenda that has harmed the social fabric of India, commended the US government for denying Modi a visa, and called for religious freedom and related human rights issues to be included in bilateral talks with India. Gabbard swiftly stepped forward to denounce the resolution for failing to strengthen ties with India. 5 months later, in April 2014, the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission held a hearing on the plight of religious minorities in India. Once more, Gabbard stepped forward, denouncing the timing of the hearing, stating, "I am concerned that an outcome or effect of this hearing could begin to foment such fear and loathing used for political purposes that we have seen occur in other places." Subsequently, she called herself the lone dissenting voice at the hearing, but insisted that it was important for her to correct misperceptions that were being furthered about India and about Modi, concluding, "My taking 5 minutes out of my day to go there and speak on this was a very small thing when you look at the impact that it had." It certainly did have an impact on her campaign coffers. After Modi won, the OFBJP organized victory parties around the US. Speakers at a minimum of 3 different OFBJP events named Gabbard, specifically praising her both for opposing a resolution as well as the hearing. Standing behind an OFBJP banner, one speaker argued that Modi could only perform with support from the US, and that such support could only be gained by influencing the US's foreign policymakers. Calling Gabbard a lady who has been doing work for us, he added, "Open up your checkbooks, write a check for her, because she's fighting election in 2014. At another event, he again invoked Gabbard's opposition to the resolution, declaring, "Whatever the donations you make is not enough, because she needs to win." Gabbard actually keynoted that event. It was her second time headlining an OFBJP victory banquet for Modi. After she praised the audience of Indian Americans for all the hard work that they had done to make Modi's election possible, the chief of the OFBJP, an Indian politician, spoke. Noting that Gabbard was facing re-election to a second term, he compared her campaign to Modi's. "We are sure, with the support of the people of Indian origin, the non-resident Indians, and of course the US citizens, your victory later this year is a foregone conclusion," he declared. "I'm predicting today for your victory." To conclude the night, Gabbard posed for pictures with the OFBJP chief while wearing a scarf emblazoned with the BJP's logo. That year, approximately 24% of her campaign donations came from individuals distinctly identifiable as linked to the American song or to pro-Modi activism. After winning re-election to a second term in November 2014, she immediately traveled to India for a solo 3-week tour. After the sophomore congresswoman met with Modi and top members of his cabinet, she traveled to speak at 2 different RSS-affiliated conferences. At the second one, praising Modi as a man on a mission and assuring her audience that the past is buried, she concluded, "There was a lot of misinformation that surrounded the event in 2002, referring to the pogrom in Gujarat. In 2015, she hosted the RSS spokesperson turned BJP spokesperson as Modi's special guest at her wedding. In 2016, the HSS's global coordinator described her as a very close friend of the song Parivar, who has always been there for us. In November 2018, she hosted Bharat Barai in her office, and shortly after, held a conference call with a number of Indian American supporters, including the VHP America's president, to discuss her plans to run for president. In January 2019, she announced her campaign for the presidency, but it was not the smoothest of sailing. In California in March, and in Texas in April, she was protested by Indian Americans over her RSS ties. As the allegations continued to hound her, she also began facing implications from former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton that she was being groomed by the Russians. That only led to her RSS ties receiving greater scrutiny. There is no evidence that Gabbard is any kind of Russian agent, reported media watchdog Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting in October 2019. Lost in the noise is the reality that Gabbard's most troubling attribute is her documented connection to the far-right Hindu nationalist or Hindutva movement known as RSS, the parent organization of India's ruling BJP party. The RSS draws much of its power from its followers in the diaspora, and Gabbard has been crucial to revamping the image of the Hindu nationalist in the United States, and has in turn received crucial financial support from the Indian American far right. The song in America backed Tulsi Gabbard because they understand that the international community is increasingly worried about the sectarian violent politics of the song in India. Ashok Sweng, a professor of peace and conflict studies at Sweden's Uppsala University, told me. They want some powerful political personalities on their side, particularly in the US. They believe Tulsi can be one of them, who can provide them cover from international sanctions. Tulsi has also done that in the past. Gabbard, however, lost her bid for the presidency and opted not to run for re-election to Congress. So some of her oldest and biggest RSS-affiliated donors, people like Bharat Barai and Ramesh Buttada, turned their attention to another candidate. In Houston, Texas, Sri Preston Kulkarni threw his hat in the ring for Congress in late 2017. He faced off against incumbent Congressman Pete Olson. Despite his political inexperience, Kulkarni came within 5 points of unseating Olson, a slim enough margin of defeat that had allegedly inspired Olson to retire. Faced with the opportunity to win an open seat, Kulkarni again announced for Congress. Just as in 2018, the Democratic National Committee marked the district as a red to blue battleground. By the November 2020 election, Kulkarni had outraised his opponent 3-1, and internal polls placed him 5 points ahead. Then Election Day arrived, and Kulkarni lost by nearly 7 points. It was late in the game when reports of Kulkarni's RSS ties first emerged. Speaking to a diaspora newspaper, Vijay Pallod described how his relative, HSS's Ramesh Buttada, had met with community stalwarts, regardless of their party affiliation, to bring their financial power to help Kulkarni so that they could get his campaign off the ground in the first month. When he won the nomination in 2018, Kulkarni announced his gratitude for Pallod and Buttada. Without them, this campaign literally could not have happened, he said, adding, "Ramesh Buttada has been like a father to me on this campaign." The intimacy of the connections unleashed a wave of concern among Indian American Muslims, particularly as Kulkarni's primary qualification for a congressional seat was his 14-year career in the U.S. Foreign Service, and it seemed likely that, if elected, he'd be vying for a Foreign Affairs Committee assignment, putting him in the position to influence U.S. foreign policy towards India. Engage, a political action committee that calls itself the Political Home for American Muslims, had endorsed Kulkarni in 2018. Since then, reported the group in September 2020, they discovered that some of Kulkarni's largest donors and closest supporters are leaders of organizations promoting Hindutva. After interviewing him and learning that he was unwilling to publicly condemn Hindutva-inspired organizations such as RSS, HSS, and BJP, or repudiate his donors linked to these organizations, they publicly refused to re-endorse him. The Indian American Muslim Council sent him a letter explaining, "Many of us in the Muslim community were looking forward to your public disavowal of Hindutva and distancing of your campaign from Hindutva's front organizations in the U.S. To the dismay of many Indian Americans, as well as progressives and liberals, you have done just the opposite." And the local community, which in that district includes tens of thousands of Muslim voters, launched a quiet campaign to vote blue no matter who, except in District 22. And so, with all odds otherwise in his favor, Kulkarni lost. Aside from their key roles in groups like the HSS and the VHPA, Bharat Barai and Ramesh Butata are particularly noteworthy for the role they played in actually helping to get Modi elected through their work with the OFBJP. Thus, it is not merely their positions in RSS subsidiaries, or affiliates or offshoots, or however one might describe them, that is concerning when considering their political activity in America, but also their role in installing and propping up the ruling party in India. The OFBJP was formed in March 1991, said its founder, to propagate the policies and philosophies of the BJP and rebuff the dissemination of information by the vested interests. The group's certificate of incorporation says it is focused on projecting a positive and correct image of India and its people in the US and foreign media, and correcting any distortions in the media's reporting of current events taking place in India. According to the former OFBJP chief, his job was to touch base with as many among the diaspora as possible and to indoctrinate them with the BJP ideology. Its job is also to mobilize an army of volunteers, or, according to some sources, hired volunteers, from abroad to support election of the BJP in India. During India's 2014 general election, nearly 5,000 volunteers flew from the US to India to serve as campaign workers, while Bharat Barai personally led a team of at least 650. Ramesh Butata gave his blessing to a team of 30 Houstonians before staying behind to manage a 700-person phone bank working round the clock to motivate voters in India. The traditional muscle power of the BJP has always been the RSS, a former US ambassador to India once said. The muscle power of the OFBJP is the HSS. Butata is but one of many examples of HSS executives around the country who have also served as presidents, vice presidents, national councilors, and longtime activists and organizers for the OFBJP. However, there is much concern that these groups may not just provide time and people power to support the BJP from abroad, but actual financing. Such concerns are bolstered by the fact that Modi's regime changed Indian law in 2018 to allow political parties to receive foreign funding. In August 2020, after 29 years in operation, the OFBJP was finally, amidst reports it was under investigation by the Department of Justice, compelled to register as a foreign agent and admit that it often acts under the direction or at the request of BJP officials. Time alone will tell whether that change in status constitutes a spoke in the wheel or merely a bump in the road for the RSS BJP's overseas support base. Meanwhile, While Kulkarni lost his campaign due to his RSS ties, and Gabbard, after years of criticism for her own RSS ties, will soon be out of office, Krishnamurti remains, as do a number of elected officials in state legislatures and city councils around the country. And the HSS continues its public relations campaign, seeking to normalize and whitewash the RSS in America.